My half-sister and I were close growing up, but when our mother died, she claimed everything and then I'm Caleb, 27 years old, and up until recently, I thought my family was about as solid as they come. Growing up, it was mostly just me, my mom, and my half-sister Lily, who's 29 now. My dad was never in the picture, and neither was Lily's. Mom raised us on her own. If anyone asked, I'd tell them Lily and I were thick as thieves. Maybe it was because our mom made such a point of keeping us close, or maybe because we just fit together naturally. I always thought we'd have each other's backs no matter what. Mom, who'd always been strong and full of life, passed away unexpectedly a few months ago. She was only 56, and none of us saw it coming. One minute she was planning a weekend camping trip with us. The next she was gone. I still remember that numb, hollow feeling sitting in the hospital, hearing the words but not processing them. Lily and I clung to each other during those first few days. I remember looking at her and thinking, at least I've still got her. I didn't know then that this loss would start unraveling everything we built together. After the funeral, reality set in. All the practical things had to be dealt with, and it was a mess. Mom hadn't left a lot behind, but there were some assets: her house, a small savings account, a few valuable things she'd collected over the years. I assumed Lily and I would work through it together, splitting everything fairly. But right after the funeral, Lily started acting different. She'd pulled away, insisting she'd handle everything because I was still dealing with the loss. I appreciated it at first. She'd always been the strong one, taking charge when things got tough. But this felt different, almost secretive. It started with the little things. When I asked about going over Mom's will, Lily brushed me off, saying she'd already talked to the lawyer and that I didn't need to worry about it. She'd take care of it. I figured maybe it was her way of coping, keeping busy, avoiding her feelings. I tried to respect that, but every time I'd ask to see Mom's paperwork or ask about her estate, Lily would get defensive. I started feeling like an outsider in my own family, like she'd built a wall I wasn't allowed to see over. I tried telling myself I was overthinking things, that we were both grieving in our own ways, and that maybe she'd open up once things settled down. But as weeks went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We'd been so close our whole lives, so why did it feel like she was pushing me away now? It was like I didn't know her at all anymore. One night, after a few too many drinks, I decided to bring it up. We were at my place, sitting on the couch in silence, something that had become the new norm for us. I finally asked, Lily, why won't you just show me the will? I just want to understand what's going on. She tensed up, looking away. Caleb, I told you, I'm handling it. Mom left things a certain way. I'm just following her wishes, but why can't we go over it together? I pressed, my frustration creeping into my voice. It's like you're hiding something. What could possibly be so complicated? Her face changed. I'd never seen her look at me like that, almost like I was a stranger. It's not that simple, Caleb, she said, her voice icy. Mom wanted certain things done in a certain way, and it's my job to make sure that happens. You wouldn't understand. Wouldn't understand? What was that supposed to mean? We were siblings. We'd grown up together. If there was anyone who'd understand, it was me. But the more I tried to get her to explain, the more she clammed up. By the end of that night, I was left with more questions than answers. The next day, I decided to reach out to Mom's lawyer myself. I felt bad about going behind Lily's back, but I was desperate. I thought maybe if I could understand what was really going on, I could help her, maybe even bridge whatever gap was forming between us. But when I called, the lawyer's secretary told me that Lily had already signed some paperwork to become the executor of Mom's estate and had requested no further communication with anyone else, including me. That didn't make any sense. Lily knew how much Mom meant to me. She knew how involved I wanted to be. Why would she cut me out like that? When I called her later that night to confront her, she barely even listened. She brushed me off again, saying it was for the best and that I needed to just let it go. Let it go? This was our mother's legacy we were talking about. Memories, family heirlooms, the house we grew up in. How was I supposed to just sit back and let her take control of everything without even including me? The worst part was, I was starting to doubt everything I'd believed about us. Growing up, Lily was my rock, my best friend. I looked up to her. I trusted her with everything. But now, it was like I didn't even know who she was. She'd turned cold, distant. I'd lie awake at night wondering if all those memories of us being close were just in my head. Maybe she'd never felt the same bond one did. As I dug deeper, I found out Mom's will had specific instructions about how her assets were supposed to be divided between Lily and me. But since Lily had taken over as executor, she had access to everything, while I had no way of verifying what was actually in the will. Each time I asked her to let me see it, she dodged the question, either changing the subject or saying she'd get to it later. One night, in a moment of pure frustration, I told her over the phone that I'd have no choice but to talk to a lawyer myself if she didn't let me in on what was happening. There was a pause, and I thought maybe she was finally going to explain. Instead, she laughed, a cold, bitter sound that felt like a slap. "Fine, Caleb," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "If you think you deserve anything from Mom, go ahead. But don't be surprised if you end up with nothing." That was it. The final twist of the knife. The girl who had once been my partner in crime, who'd been there for every family crisis, was now telling me that I might get nothing at all. I hung up feeling more lost and betrayed than I ever had in my life. After that conversation, something in me snapped. I couldn't shake the sting of Lily's words, the way she dismissed my feelings like I was a stranger. Part of me still hoped it was just the grief talking, that we'd find a way to mend things. But as the days passed without a word from her, I started to realize I couldn't wait for her to come around. If I wanted answers, I'd have to get them myself. So, I did exactly what I'd warned her about. I hired a lawyer. It felt surreal, almost like I was betraying my own family. But every time I thought about calling it off, I remembered her cold laughter, the way she told me I might get nothing. I was desperate to know the truth, and I knew Lily wasn't going to give it to me willingly. My lawyer, Ms. Harper, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a way of making you feel like she saw right through you. She didn't waste time sugarcoating things, which I appreciated. After hearing my story, she explained the process we'd need to follow to get access to Mom's estate records. It would take time, she warned, and there was no guarantee we'd uncover anything, especially if Lily had already moved assets around. But I was determined. I couldn't sit by and let everything Mom had worked for disappear into thin air. The first step was to file a formal request to see the will. This would notify Lily that I was challenging her role as sole executor, which I knew wouldn't go over well. I braced myself for her reaction, but to my surprise, she stayed silent. Days went by, then weeks, and I didn't hear a word from her. Part of me was relieved, but it also made me uneasy. What was she doing with all that time? What was she planning? Then, just as I was starting to feel like I might be making a mountain out of a molehill, I got a call from Ms. Harper. "Caleb, I just received an interesting document," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of something else, maybe concern. "It appears your mother left behind an updated will. I think you'll want to see this." My heart pounded as I drove to Ms. Harper's office that afternoon. I hadn't expected this. In my mind, I'd imagined that Mom's will was straightforward, that Lily had simply taken advantage of her position as executor to take control. But now, I was facing the possibility that there was something in Mom's final wishes that I hadn't known about. When I arrived, Ms. Harper was waiting for me with a folder on her desk. She gestured for me to sit, then opened the folder and handed me a copy of the will. As I skimmed the document, my eyes caught on specific instructions Mom had left. The will was clear. The house was to be divided equally between Lily and me, along with any remaining financial assets. There was also a small savings account that was meant for my education, a fund Mom had quietly kept for me in case I wanted to go back to school or pursue any personal projects. None of these assets were meant to go solely to Lily. So, she was supposed to share it with me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It felt like a punch to the gut. All this time, Lily had been lying. Ms. Harper nodded, her face sympathetic but professional. "It seems that way. And from the looks of it, she had no right to keep you from accessing any of this information. Legally, you're entitled to half of everything." The weight of it all hit me. All this time, I've been trying to make sense of Lily's actions, wondering if I'd somehow misread our relationship or if her behavior was just part of her grieving process. But now, it was clear. She deliberately kept me in the dark. It wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a choice. As Ms. Harper went over the next steps, I couldn't help but feel a wave of anger rising in me. I'd lost my mom, and now I was losing my sister, too. The memories of our childhood together felt tainted. I'd thought we were a team, that nothing could break us apart. But apparently, a few assets were enough to turn her against me. The next step was to contact Lily directly. Ms. Harper suggested we try to settle things out of court to avoid dragging the family name through a lengthy legal battle. She offered to draft a letter explaining that I now had access to the will and that I expected her to follow Mom's wishes. I agreed, hoping that a formal letter might make her see reason. When the letter was sent, I waited anxiously, hoping for some kind of response, maybe an apology or at least an explanation. But days passed without a word. It felt like she was daring me to take this further, to challenge her authority. And as much as I hated the idea of fighting my own sister, I couldn't just walk away. Finally, a few days later, I got a call. When I saw Lily's name on my screen, my heart leapt. Maybe this was it. Maybe she was ready to talk, to explain why she'd kept me in the dark. But as soon as I answered, I realized how wrong I'd been. "Caleb," she said, her voice cold and clipped. "I received your little letter." I tried to keep my voice steady, but I couldn't hide the hurt. "Lily, why didn't you tell me? Mom wanted us to share everything. You know that. Why did you try to keep me out?" She let out a harsh laugh. "You think you deserve half? After everything Mom went through because of your father?" I was stunned. She'd never mentioned anything like this before. "What does my father have to do with this?" I asked, genuinely confused. Mom had rarely talked about him, and as far as I knew, he wasn't part of the picture. "Oh, please," she snapped. "You have no idea, do you? Mom spent years dealing with his mess, cleaning up after his mistakes. And yet, you were always her favorite. She kept that fun for you, gave you everything, while I had to scrape by. I'm not letting you take another cent." Her words cut deep. I'd always thought Lily knew I hadn't chosen any of this, that we were in it together, no matter what. But here she was, throwing it all in my face, as if I was responsible for choices made before I was even born. "Lily, that's not fair," I said, my voice shaking. I had no control over what Mom did. I never asked for any of this. I just want what's rightfully mine, what Mom wanted for both of us. But she wasn't listening. "You can fight me all you want, Caleb, but you'll lose. I'll make sure of it." She hung up before I could say another word. I sat there in silence, feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under me. This wasn't the Lily I knew. The sister who'd helped me sneak out to see my first concert, who'd stayed up late helping me study for finals, who'd held my hand the night we found out Mom was sick. I didn't recognize the person I'd just spoken to. In the days that followed, I tried to reach out to her, to give her one last chance to make this right. I left messages, emails, even drove by her house once, though I couldn't bring myself to knock on her door. But she never responded. It was like I'd lost her entirely, like she'd erased me from her life. Miss Harper informed me that Lily had formally refused to negotiate, which meant we had no choice but to file a suit. I felt sick to my stomach as I signed the paperwork, but I knew there was no other option. I couldn't let her take everything Mom had left us, even if it meant going to war with the only family I had left. As I handed the documents back to Miss Harper, she looked at me with a hint of sympathy. "You're doing the right thing, Caleb. Sometimes, family doesn't act like family." But that was the problem, wasn't it? I'd spent my whole life believing Lily and I were closer than most siblings, that we'd weather any storm together. Now, I wasn't sure I even knew who she was. As I walked out of Miss Harper's office, the weight of the situation settled over me. I'd lost my mother, and now I was fighting my sister over her memory. And no matter how it ended, I knew I'd never look at Lily, or our past, the same way again. Filing the lawsuit against Lily felt like crossing a line I could never come back from. Once the papers were submitted, everything became real. Miss Harper warned me that things would get messy from here, but I hadn't expected the barrage of emails and calls I received from Lily's lawyer over the next few days. It was like she was trying to drown me in paperwork, hoping I'd back down. I hadn't heard Lily's voice since our last argument, but the messages from her lawyer made her thoughts perfectly clear. She'd chosen to fight tooth and nail rather than share a single piece of Mom's estate. Each letter was cold, impersonal, full of legal jargon about why she was justified in keeping everything. But underneath it all, I could feel the anger, the resentment simmering. It was hard not to take it personally when I saw how determined she was to shut me out completely. Then, one day, Ms. Harper called with news that made my heart sink. "Caleb, it looks like Lily's not just fighting you over the estate. She's trying to discredit your claim altogether," she said, her tone laced with concern. "She's contesting your right to anything based on, well, let's just say there's an unusual angle." "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a mix of confusion and dread. "She's claiming that because you were only Mom's son from her second marriage, you don't have a legitimate claim to the inheritance. Apparently, she's insinuating that you were a temporary addition to the family, brought in by a marriage that, in her view, Mom regretted." The words hit me like a slap. It was one thing to argue over who deserved what, but to question my place in the family altogether. That was a new low. I could barely wrap my head around it. Lily and I had grown up together, shared our lives, our secrets. We'd been siblings in every sense that mattered. How could she deny that now? Feeling sick, I asked Miss Harper what my options were. "We have strong evidence to support your claim," she reassured me. "The will names you explicitly as one of the inheritors. But Caleb, if Lily's willing to go this far, she might have more secrets. Is there anything else you haven't told me about your family? Anything she might use against you?" I racked my brain, but I couldn't think of anything significant. Sure, my father had left when I was young, and I knew he'd caused some financial stress on my mom before he disappeared, but that was years ago. None of it seemed relevant to what was happening now. Despite my confusion, I felt a strange determination building inside me. I had spent my life idolizing Lily, trusting her blindly, but now I could see that she had been harboring resentment for years, resentment I'd never noticed. The things she'd said about Mom favoring me, about our father's mistakes, all took on a new, bitter significance. It was like she'd been waiting for this moment to finally take what she thought she was owed. A few days later, I got a call from one of Mom's old friends, Janet. She'd heard about the lawsuit through the grapevine, and her voice was laced with concern as she asked me what was going on. I didn't want to drag anyone else into this mess, but she sounded genuinely worried. So I told her about the fight over the inheritance and how Lily was trying to exclude me entirely. Janet was silent for a moment, then sighed. "Caleb, I don't know if I should be the one to tell you this, but, well, your mom and I were very close. There's something she shared with me years ago, and I think it might explain why Lily's acting this way." I felt a chill go down my spine. "What do you mean?" "She told me that after she and Lily's dad separated, she had a very rough time. She always wanted Lily to have a stable father figure, and that's part of why she remarried when she met your dad. But things with him were complicated. He wasn't always reliable, and your mom worried about what kind of influence he'd have on you." I didn't know what to say. My memories of my father were hazy at best. He'd been in and out of my life so often that I'd learned not to count on him. I'd always assumed that was just the way he was, but Janet made it sound like there was more to the story. She told me once that she felt guilty about the way things turned out. Your dad wasn't what she'd hoped for, but she loved you more than anything. I think she was just afraid of how that choice affected Lily. Suddenly, so many things started to make sense. Lily's resentment, her comments about my father. It was like she'd been blaming me for choices that had nothing to do with me. Choices that had left scars on both of us, but in different ways. When I told Miss Harper about my conversation with Janet, she nodded thoughtfully. "It sounds like Lily's using her anger over the past to justify her actions now. But that doesn't change the legal facts. You have a right to what your mother left you, and we'll prove it." But even with Ms. Harper's assurance, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more I wasn't seeing. Lily had been harboring this anger for years, and if I was going to face her in court, I needed to be prepared for anything she might throw at me. The next few weeks passed in a tense silence. I tried to go about my life, but every day felt heavier with the knowledge that Lily and I would soon be standing on opposite sides of a courtroom. I wanted to believe that, deep down, she'd remember the bond we shared, that she'd realize how pointless this fight was. But every interaction we'd had since Mom's death told me that the sister I'd known was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Finally, the day came. I walked into the courtroom, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and dread. Lily was already there, sitting with her lawyer, a tall, sharp-looking woman who was talking to her in low, serious tones. When our eyes met, Lily didn't smile. In fact, she looked right through me, like I was a stranger. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. As the proceedings began, Ms. Harper presented our case, laying out the terms of Mom's will and the specific assets that should have been shared between Lily and me. I kept my eyes forward, trying not to look at Lily, trying not to think about the fact that the person fighting me was the same girl who'd once been my closest friend. Then it was Lily's turn. Her lawyers stood and began making their case, painting a picture of our family that felt twisted, almost unrecognizable. She claimed that I'd only been added to Mom's will out of obligation, that Mom had regretted the relationship with my father, and that I had no real right to the inheritance because I wasn't truly a part of the family. It was as if they were trying to erase my place in the family entirely. I was too stunned to react. I felt like I was in a nightmare, listening as they tore apart my relationship with my mother, casting doubt on the love she'd shown me, the sacrifices she'd made. I'd always thought that, despite her issues with my father, she'd loved me without reservation. But the way Lily and her lawyer told it, I was nothing more than a mistake, a burden. But then, just when I thought I couldn't take any more, Ms. Harper stood up to cross-examine Lily. She started asking questions, digging deeper into the timeline, the conversations Lily had supposedly had with Mom about the inheritance. And slowly, cracks began to show in Lily's story. Ms. Harper pressed harder, asking Lily about specific dates and events, trying to get her to explain why, if our mother had supposedly regretted naming me as an heir, she'd gone to the trouble of updating her will just a few years before her death to include me. Lily started to falter. I could see her getting flustered, her responses growing more defensive, less certain. Ms. Harper didn't let up, zeroing in on each inconsistency until Lily was practically shaking with frustration. Finally, in a moment of pure exasperation, Lily blurted out, she never should have left him anything. He didn't deserve it after everything his father put her through. The courtroom fell silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on us, but I couldn't move. It was like a bomb had gone off, and I was just standing there, trying to process the fallout. Miss Harper looked over at me, then back at Lily. So this isn't about Caleb's right to the inheritance, is it, Lily? This is about old resentments, personal feelings that have nothing to do with what your mother wanted. Lily looked down, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. For the first time since this whole ordeal had begun, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the truth was finally coming to light. After that day in court, the mask Lily had worn since Mom's passing started to slip. Her outburst about my father's past opened a door to the real issue. This fight wasn't about money. It was about old resentments that had festered beneath the surface for years. I'd always known Lily had a complicated relationship with our mom, but I never imagined she blamed me for it, or that she'd been carrying this grudge since childhood. In the days following her outburst, I kept replaying her words in my head, trying to make sense of them. The way she spat out, "He didn't deserve it," felt like it came from somewhere deep, like she had been holding on to that anger for as long as I'd been in her life. Suddenly, every interaction we'd had over the years, every small argument, every jealous look, took on new meaning. I realized how much of Lily's anger wasn't just about me. It was about a family dynamic I'd never fully understood. As the trial continued, Ms. Harper told me to expect more hostility. Now that Lily had shown her cards, her lawyer would likely double down, using every tool available to twist the narrative. I prepared myself for the worst, but nothing could have prepared me for what Lily did next. One afternoon, Ms. Harper called, her tone urgent. "Caleb, Lily's lawyer just filed a request for evidence that, well, that might complicate things." "What kind of evidence?" I asked, trying to keep the anxiety out of my voice. "She's demanding a paternity test." The words hung in the air like a cloud of smoke. I didn't know what to say. A paternity test? The thought had never crossed my mind. As far as I knew, Mom had always made it clear that my father was who he was. There had never been a question about it. But now, Lily was questioning even that. She was trying to prove that I wasn't even Mom's biological child, effectively erasing my right to her inheritance entirely. I felt a wave of nausea as the reality of her tactics sank in. This was about more than money or family heirlooms now. Lily was trying to disown me, to strip me of any connection to our mother, as if I'd never been part of the family at all. It was ruthless, and it hurt more deeply than anything I'd ever felt. Do I have to go through with it? I asked Miss Harper, the desperation clear in my voice. She sighed, her voice softer than usual. Legally, we don't have much choice. If she's insisting on it as part of her defense, we'll need to comply. But Caleb, no matter what the test says, it doesn't change the fact that your mother raised you, loved you, and wanted you to be part of her legacy. Remember that. It was a small comfort, but it was something to hold on to as I agreed to take the test. I told myself it would be fine, that this was just another one of Lily's desperate moves. But as I sat in that sterile clinic waiting room, waiting to give a sample that would somehow determine my entire future, I felt like a stranger in my own life. Days passed in a blur of anxiety and dread as I waited for the test results. The courtroom battles continued, with Ms. Harper tirelessly defending my place in Mom's life. Each hearing felt like a grueling test of endurance, with Lily's lawyer constantly trying to cast me as an outsider, a mistake, someone who didn't deserve any part of the family legacy. And every time I looked over at Lily, I saw only cold determination in her eyes, a complete lack of remorse. Finally, the day came. Ms. Harper called me into her office to go over the test results, her face unreadable. She closed the door behind me, motioned for me to sit, and handed me the results in a sealed envelope. I stared at it, hands shaking. Part of me didn't want to open it, didn't want to know the truth, but I forced myself to tear open the envelope and read the words inside. The test confirmed that I was my mother's biological son. Relief flooded through me, but it was mixed with a sense of sadness. I'd been forced to question my own identity, to doubt the very foundation of my life, all because of Lily's bitterness. And while I was relieved that the results affirmed what I'd always believed, the experience had left scars I knew would take a long time to heal. Miss Harper gave me a reassuring nod. This will strengthen our case, Caleb. Lily's attempts to discredit you are losing ground. But even though the paternity test was behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. I'd spent my life believing that Lily was the one person I could count on, that we shared a bond nothing could break. Now I realized that bond had been one-sided. I'd seen her as my sister, my family, my partner in crime. But to her, I'd always been an outsider, someone she tolerated but never truly accepted. Back in court, Ms. Harper presented the paternity results as part of our case, showing once and for all that I was Mom's rightful son and had every legal right to an equal share of her estate. Lily sat across the room, her face a mask of indifference, but I could see the tension in her posture, the way her fingers gripped the edge of the table. She'd lost one of her biggest arguments, and there was nothing left for her to deny. As the final days of the trial approached, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and numbness. I wanted this to be over, wanted to move on with my life, but I knew that whatever the outcome, things would never go back to the way they were. Even if I won my share of the inheritance, I'd lost my sister. And in some ways, that felt like a greater loss than any financial gain could make up for. On the last day of court, both lawyers presented their closing arguments. Ms. Harper spoke passionately about Mom's intentions, emphasizing that she'd wanted her estate to be shared between her two children, regardless of the complications of the past. She argued that I was not only Mom's son in blood, but in every way that mattered, that I'd been a part of her life and legacy as much as Lily had. When it was Lily's lawyer's turn, I expected another brutal attack on my character. But to my surprise, he took a different approach. He spoke about family, about the sacrifices Lily had made for Mom in her later years, and about the deep connection she'd always felt to her mother. It was an emotional appeal, designed to paint Lily as the true daughter, the one who'd been there through everything. I felt a pang of sadness, realizing how much pain was tangled up in this fight. In her own twisted way, Lily loved Mom too. But instead of sharing that love, she'd let it fester into resentment, turning her against the one person who had always tried to be there for her. After the final arguments, the judge adjourned, saying he would deliver the verdict in a few days. I walked out of the courtroom feeling drained, barely able to process the emotions swirling inside me. I'd fought so hard to defend my right to be part of Mom's legacy, but in the end, it felt like I was walking away with nothing that really mattered. That night, I got a text from Lily. It was the first time she'd reached out since we started this whole ordeal. My heart pounded as I opened it, unsure of what to expect. The message was short, almost bitter in its simplicity. "You got what you wanted. I hope it was worth it." I stared at the screen, feeling a pang of anger mixed with grief. I wanted to respond, to tell her that none of this had been what I wanted, that all I'd ever wanted was to share Mom's memory with her. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Lily had made up her mind, and nothing I said would change that. In the days leading up to the verdict, I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into work, spending time with friends, anything to keep my mind off the looming judgment. But no matter what I did, the sense of loss lingered, an ache that no amount of distraction could soothe. Finally, the day of the verdict arrived. I sat in the courtroom, hands clenched, listening as the judge went over the case details one last time before delivering his decision. When he announced that I was entitled to my half of the inheritance, a wave of relief washed over me. But it was a hollow victory. I glanced at Lily, hoping for some sign of understanding, some acknowledgement that we could still salvage something from this mess. But she avoided my gaze, her expression stony, and I knew that whatever we'd once shared was gone. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. I'd fought for my right to be part of Mom's legacy, but in the process, I'd lost my sister. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mom's last wish had been to leave us something to share, something to keep us connected, but instead, it had torn us apart. In the end, I had what was rightfully mine, but the victory felt hollow. I'd fought for my place in the family, only to realize that family isn't something you can win in court. Family is built on love, trust, and the memories you share. And while I'd won the case, I'd lost the one person who'd shared those memories with me. I walked away from the courthouse that day with my inheritance intact, but my family shattered, wondering if it was worth the cost. Winning the case felt nothing like I'd imagined. As I left the courthouse that day, holding onto my share of the inheritance, there was no sense of triumph, only a hollow, aching feeling of loss. I'd fought for what was rightfully mine, but I'd lost the one person who had always been there, for better or worse. Lily and I had gone from being inseparable to estranged in a matter of months, and despite the legal victory, I felt more defeated than ever. I tried to go back to normal life, but nothing felt quite right. The memories of our childhood, the countless moments we'd shared, kept creeping into my mind, reminding me of what I'd lost. Every time I thought about reaching out, though, I'd remember her cold words, her determination to push me out of the family as if I were a stranger. I wasn't sure if there was any chance left for reconciliation. One afternoon, a few weeks after the trial had ended, I decided to start sorting through Mom's things. I'd been putting it off, but I felt like I owed it to her to finally go through her belongings, to honor her memory. While sifting through her personal items, I found a small, old-fashioned jewelry box tucked away in the back of her closet. Inside, I found a few mementos, a worn ring, a couple of faded photos, and, to my surprise, a letter addressed to both Lily and me. I opened the letter, my heart pounding. Mom's familiar handwriting greeted me, gentle and a little shaky, as though she'd written it late at night. The words she'd left us felt like a balm on my aching heart. "My dearest Caleb and Lily, I hope you both know how much you mean to me. My life hasn't been easy, and I know I've made mistakes. But you two have been the brightest parts of my life. My only wish is for you to hold on to each other, even after I'm gone. Caleb, I know you felt out of place sometimes, wondering about the things that happened before you were born. And Lily, my beautiful girl, I know you've carried burdens I should have lifted for you. I am so sorry for that. I made sure to leave you both something, not because of what it's worth, but because it's my way of keeping you connected. Please, don't let my mistakes pull you apart. My love for both of you is boundless, and I need you to know that. My greatest hope is that you'll find a way to stay close, even when it's hard. By the time I finished reading, tears blurred my vision. The letter revealed a depth of love and regret I hadn't known Mom felt. She'd seen our struggles, felt our pain, and left this letter as a way to guide us after she was gone. I wondered if Lily had ever read it, if maybe she'd felt the same mix of emotions I did. Knowing Mom had loved us both deeply despite everything, I knew I had to reach out. I couldn't let things end like this, not after what Mom had written. With her words echoing in my mind, I decided to call Lily and ask if she'd be willing to meet one last time. It took several attempts, but eventually, she answered, her voice wary and cold. I told her about the letter, how Mom had written it for both of us, and after a long silence, she reluctantly agreed to meet. We met at a quiet cafe near her place, the same one we used to go to as kids with Mom. The familiar surroundings felt almost surreal, and I couldn't help but remember the laughter we used to share there. But as I looked across the table at Lily, I saw none of that warmth. She looked guarded, arms crossed, her face hard. I pulled out the letter and handed it to her. Mom wrote this for both of us, I said quietly. I think you should read it. She took it hesitantly, glancing down at the words. As she read, her expression softened, and I saw something shift in her eyes. When she finished, she looked up at me, a mixture of guilt and sadness clouding her face. She was everything to me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I know you loved her too, Caleb, but it was different for me. You were always her favorite. She doted on you, saved money for you, while I felt like I was left picking up the pieces after every one of her failed relationships. Her words stung, but they weren't said in anger this time. I could hear the rawness in her voice, the years of resentment that had finally found a way out. I never knew you felt that way, I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom tried her best with both of us, but she wasn't perfect. She loved you, Lily. I think she felt guilty about the past, about not giving you the stability you needed. She looked away, tears glistening in her eyes. It's hard to believe that sometimes. I wanted her love so badly, but it felt like I was always competing with you, even when I knew it wasn't your fault. In that moment, I saw her as the sister I'd grown up with, the girl who'd once been my closest friend. We'd both been scarred by our family's complicated past, by mistakes that were never ours to bear. I felt the weight of the years between us, all the unspoken hurts and misunderstandings that had brought us to this point. I'm not here to fight anymore, Lily, I said softly. If you want, I'll split the inheritance in a way that feels fair to both of us. Mom wanted us to stay close, and maybe this is the only way I know how to honor that. She stared at me, her expression wavering between gratitude and disbelief. Why would you do that after everything? Because, despite everything, you're still my sister, I replied. I don't want money to be the reason we lose that completely. Mom's letter. It reminded me of what really matters. For a long time, she didn't say anything. Then, finally, she nodded, a small, reluctant nod, but one that felt like a step toward healing. I don't know if things will ever be the same between us, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. But maybe we can start over. We didn't leave the cafe as best friends, and there was no magic reconciliation. We didn't hug or make grand promises. But for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. We had finally begun to face the things we'd both buried, the pain that had driven us apart, and maybe, just maybe, there was hope that we could find our way back to each other, one step at a time. As I walked away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Mom's words lingered in my mind, her hope that we would stay close, even when it was hard. And though I knew the road ahead would be complicated, I felt ready to walk it, grateful that I'd found the courage to reach out one last time. Our family wasn't perfect, and it probably never would be. But maybe, with time, we could build something new, something that would honor the love Mom had left us. And that, I realized, was the true inheritance she'd given us. The chance to forgive, to heal, and to remember that family, no matter how broken, was worth fighting for.